Hello, friends, and welcome to Looking Up. We're a podcast for Christian women, and we enjoy getting together once a week and just chatting about things that we find interesting to Christian women in particular, but probably other people might be interested as well. We hope so. And we just have fun with this every week, and we try to make it a positive experience and remind women to look up and to focus on the good in life and what God has done for us. And so that's our purpose. And I'm joined by my good friend, Kathy Pollard. My name is Carla Moore, and we're going to talk about something fun today, and glad that you've joined us. And how are you doing, Kathy?
I'm doing good. I was just looking at you doing that introduction. You do such a good job with that.
Oh, I don't. We were just saying beforehand that I like it better when it's your turn because I never know what to say. But
And I like it
just,
better when it's your turn, but you just seem so natural and
well,
sweet
thanks.
sounding, and you're doing a great
You're
job. So
just saying
you
that.
should but you should do the intro every week.
No, definitely not. No. But we're going to
Okay.
talk today about wisdom lit, which may
Mm-hmm.
not be what people think it is, but we'll explain that in a few minutes. But we're
Mm-hmm.
also going to talk at the very end. If you'll stay to the end, we're going to give you something good, and we'll leave that a little bit mysterious for now. And if you'll stay, listen all the way through, you'll understand what we're talking about later. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, what's going on in Kentucky these days?
Well, I mean, we don't want to start off talking about the weather, I know, but I have to say the weather's perfect. We're
Yeah, I'm
coming
wearing
into
long
that.
sleeves.
Yes, coming into that kind of fallish this morning when we went out to milk the cow. It was the first chilly morning, and
Mm-hmm.
I had to grab like a little fleece jacket
Yeah.
to go out to the barn. So, but the days are sunny, the leaves are kind of falling, and I was walking down the long driveway to the mailbox yesterday, and I could hear them kind of, when they first fall, they're
Crunchy.
soft, but
Uh-huh.
yeah, they had already gotten crunchy, and my feet
Mm-hmm.
were crunching on the drive, and I thought, oh, I love everything about fall. So we're
Well, you
coming into
shared
that.
some pictures a couple of days ago, or maybe it
Mm-hmm.
was just yesterday, about your view
Yeah.
from the barn, and it made me think, I wonder what it's going to look like and feel like in a couple of months when it's pretty chilly out there.
I know. I've
Do you
thought
have a
about
heater in the
that.
barn?
No,
You might have to remedy that
I
situation.
know. I know. I have to remind myself of that quote that says, there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad wardrobe. So I guess if I clothe myself properly, I can still be comfortable
Yeah.
out there in the barn in the middle of winter.
Well, I know there's people that live in the north, but
Mm-hmm.
the whole getting dressed to go outside, that's something I don't
Yeah,
exactly look forward to. I do
I
look
don't
forward to the
either.
change of seasons, but I was even looking at our hall tree that we have sitting next to the door, and
Oh,
there's
yeah.
nothing on it right now.
Yeah.
But I know in the fall, or when we come back for the spring, the January quarter, it's just laden down with all different kinds of coats and hats and gloves
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. So, how do
And
you
there's
milk a
always,
cow with gloves?
well, first of all, we use a machine.
The machine. True.
There's always more laundry in the winter because you're
Yeah.
layering everything up. And we're having more laundry anyway, I've noticed, because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when I've been out in the barn, I smell like a barn. I just,
Yeah.
and not that it smells bad, but,
Well, you don't want to go somewhere smelling like a barn.
and we have special rags that we use just for the cow, so we're
Mm-hmm.
constantly going through all of this more laundry. We're running the dishwasher more because I'm sterilizing the jars for the milk. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Imagine the olden
the
days.
winter will be really, oh,
It
yeah.
probably just smelled like a
We're
barn all the time anyway.
Mm-hmm. And if everybody did, does it matter?
Yeah. I've wondered that. Like, bad breath and BO back in the day, back way
Yeah,
years and centuries ago. I guess it was just a
it's
way
just
of life,
natural. Yeah.
and you didn't think anything about it because everybody smelled that way. Because I
Mm-hmm.
am super sensitive to that. I used to
Yeah.
ask my husband, he rolls his eyes at me, but I don't like bad breath or BO. So probably should stop there, right?
Well, if you ever see me licking the palm of my hand,
I remember you talking about that. I
yeah,
have
because I
never
heard
heard
one
that
time,
before you.
people go like that, like they breathe into
Mm-hmm.
their hand to smell their breath, but technically you're supposed to lick the palm of your hand and smell it, and that tells you if you have bad breath or not.
What if you have all kinds of germs on the palm of your hand?
Well, you
That's a whole
probably
new
do.
problem.
You probably do. You're just building up your antibodies.
Okay. Well, I'll take your word for that. That's
Ah,
that's interesting.
I have some
Well,
sad news.
oh no,
I haven't even told Neil this yet, but I have lost my Africa necklace.
the one you wear all the time?
Yes, that I've had for
Oh
a million
no.
years. Yeah.
Well,
And
that's weird because I lost my favorite necklace too not long ago.
really, oh,
Oh. Sorry, didn't mean to hijack your conversation.
Well, I finally determined that for sure this morning. But my daily jewelry, when I take it off, I have this little tiered stand on my dresser that I drop them on. And for the past few days, I've gone to reach for my African necklace and it's not there. But I have, a couple of bracelets, a couple of rings. And so I'm kind of, just like moving things around with my hands and not seeing it and thinking, oh, I'll look for it later. I'll look for it later. And so finally today I thought, where is that necklace? And I looked in my official jewelry box, which I don't know why. I never put it in there. And and then I thought, did I slip it into my purse? Was I late to church and I didn't put it on and I slipped it in my purse to put it on later. So it wasn't in there. I looked behind the dresser. Did it slip behind the dresser? Anyway, I spent some time looking for it today and could not find it anywhere. So now I'm afraid that it probably slipped off of my neck at some point. I don't know if I was out running errands. I haven't looked in the car yet. I don't know if I was in my yard. I could have been anywhere on this property. So that is very sad to me.
That is.
It's just a thing. It's just a thing, but
well, it's not. Yeah, it has a lot of memories attached to it, and it was something you wore all the time. I associate you with that necklace.
Yeah.
Well, do you have a metal detector?
Yes.
So you might be able to, follow your normal path, like between your house and the barn, but I bet it maybe in the car. I know what happened to mine. It was kind of like you're saying, I had put it, I was in a hurry, went to the car, I was holding it with the other couple of things that I was going to put on, earrings, whatever. And I set it in my lap, put my earrings on, and then I forgot about my necklace in my lap. And then we got to the restaurant we were going to. And I'm sure when I stepped out of the car, it just slipped onto the ground. And it was the round Tree of Life necklace, the pendant that I got in Israel. And it wasn't expensive, but it was just one of those that the kids always would, when I would be holding them, they'd pick it up and put it in my mouth and they want me to blow it out at them. It's just one of those silly little things that every single one of the grandkids would do that. And so I'll get another one, but it won't be the same one.
Yeah.
And we went back to that restaurant and asked, but yeah. Well, I'm sorry for you too, but I bet it's in your house somewhere or in the car.
I hope so. I lost it once before. We were heading to the airport and I put it on that morning. And by the time we got to our gate, it was gone. And so I thought I lost it in the airport, but it actually slipped off in the car. And so and I was grateful when I found it. But as soon as we got back, I took it to a jeweler and had them replace the clasp because I didn't want that to happen again.
Yeah.
But
so you had to sweat out the whole trip while you were gone, thinking that was lost. Well, that was a happy surprise. Well, way to start off with sad news.
I'm sorry.
Maybe you should look up. Is it look, is it up somewhere? That was dumb.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It was still cute.
Okay.
Have you been thrifting?
I have, because I was looking for some things to decorate the table that I put snacks on for the women's lectures this weekend. And nothing super exciting. I did find an old hat box. I think it's an old hat box. It's just kind of it has a flat back. It's about 6 inches deep and a clasp that opens up. So I bought that. I have some of those squeeze yogurts for the kids that I put in there. And,
they'll enjoy that.
And I took my table drawer over there and put granola bars and things in it. And I just found a couple of baskets and things. So, I wasn't looking for anything necessarily to sell. So I had in mind looking for table stuff. Anyway.
Will you take a picture of your setup and show it to us? So I remember last year how good it looked.
Yeah, I moved it to the other side of the room this year, and I don't like the way it looks this year as much as I did last year. I'm not sure what I did different, but I have to go work on it later today anyway.
Well, it's still functional. It still serves a really thoughtful purpose.
Yeah. Well, I used a bigger table because last year it was just one of those square card tables, and it was just too small. I felt like I was constantly worried somebody's going to bump into it and it was going to fall over. So I used a little bit bigger table, which meant that I couldn't use the tablecloth that I wanted. Anyway, trivial stuff, but we're excited about the lectures coming this weekend. Kind of kicked it off a little bit last night. You know how the Wednesday night before lectureship, you always have people that have come in early. So that we had quite a few alumni. Josh Austin spoke to the congregation during Bible class, and Lori Boyd spoke to the women's class downstairs with us. And was so good. She's such a good teacher and really
She
enjoyed what
is.
she had to say to the girls, to the women.
She's a good Bible student.
Hmm.
Hmm.
She is. And but we had lots of alumni that were here, and not just alumni, but people just visiting for lectureship. And many more
Mm.
will come in today. We're after we finish recording, there's a picnic for the alumni, but it's not just alumni. Everyone goes that can come. So I'm looking forward to that. And then we start lectureship tonight, and women's program will be all day tomorrow, and well, most of the day. I think at 8:30 until 3:30,
Hmm.
Friday and Saturday. So if you're in
Who's
the
your
area, come.
who's your kickoff speaker tonight?
I've been so focused on the women's program, I can't even remember. Maybe
Yeah.
Dan Winkler. I think
Oh,
Dan Winkler is tonight.
nice.
Eddie Parrish closes it out. I remember that he's Sunday night, but
Hmm.
there's lots and lots. We've preparation, been getting ready for it, and gift bags, and set up the tables. All of the women from from classes, we decorated the room and put up coloring books for the kids. And anyway, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it that because you've done it, but
Hmm.
sometimes people don't know the behind the scenes things. And just really
Hmm.
grateful. We've had lots and lots of help. So
Of course, by the time this airs, it'll all be over,
mhm. Yeah, that's
and you'll
right.
be hopefully getting a nap.
Hope so. Yeah. I was telling you earlier that I didn't even think about this a couple days ago. I had I think I told everyone about the espresso drink that Katie Balance had made for me that was really
Hmm.
good.
Yeah.
So I ordered one of those at Starbucks, and hers, by the way, was 100% better. But I never even thought about the fact that there's espresso in the title. So I had one of those at about 3 o'clock Tuesday afternoon, and at 2 a.m. that night, I was still wide awake. So
Mm.
yesterday was kind of a long day. So I was trying to make myself wait and not fall asleep in the middle of the day. Struggle's real.
So you have a cutoff part of the day where you can't have caffeine after
It
that.
never used to be that way, but
Because you
now
drink
apparently it
iced
is.
coffee in the afternoon, don't you?
Not anymore. That yeah.
Oh,
I
you've
I like it.
changed.
Things change, but
Yeah.
it was sugar. Like I would save, I have my leftover coffee from this morning,
Mhm.
and I used to just put ice in it in the afternoon and drink it. But that's kind of one of the ways I can cut back on sugar, is just to not drink
Mhm.
that. It was a treat. And so I'm trying to figure out ways to cut back here and there. And that's one of them.
Okay. Well,
Mm-hmm.
good deal.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Well, I have
fill your
not.
cup. Sorry,
Go,
you go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, you.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Come fill your cup was really good last weekend. The retreat was really a lot of fun. I only got to go for one night, but I got to hear Rachel Robertson. She's someone she came with us last May. Her and her husband Milton came with us to Israel, and got to know her then. And I had heard that she was a good speaker, and it was just so good. And Aaron Sprouse and Riel Crowell, those were the only ones that I got to hear, because I had to leave early
Yeah.
and get back early. But it's always a good place to go, and good women to be around who really want to study and open the word.
Mhm.
And I know you do this often, but I don't do it too often. I flew by myself, and I rented a car by myself. I told Aaron Sprouse, I said, I just feel like a big girl because I'm doing all these things that John normally does. I always book the flights. I'm not afraid to do that myself, but
Mhm.
car rental, I just don't do that by myself very often. So
Yeah. Good
it was
job.
nice. Yeah.
Good job.
Mm-hmm.
That particular event was the first time I had rented a car by myself, and it just so happened they didn't have gas in it,
Oh.
which I didn't know until I was well on my way, and I
Mm-mm.
just happened to look down and I was like at empty. And so, anyway, then I had to handle that by myself,
Mm-hmm.
calling the company, explaining what happened and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, which they were very great. They handled it,
Yeah.
but when
I
it's
guess
your
you found a
first
gas
time and you're
station.
going, yeah, when it's your first time and you're like, oh, what just happened?
Neil.
Aren't these things supposed to have gas in them already?
Yeah, well, they are. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, they're empowering, when you go through stuff like that. And it's not any trial in any sense of the word, but just doing things on
Mhm.
your own really is kind of empowering. Things that you didn't
Mhm.
really feel like either you didn't want to do them, or
Mhm.
you just didn't do them because they do them. But it's empowering.
Well, that the very first time I milked peaches by myself, because Neil was at an elders meeting, when I came back I was walking back from the barn, and I just threw my hands up in the air, and I was like, yes, I did it. I did it. And I was talking to Neil about it the next day, and I said, I just felt so invincible.
Yeah.
And his first word to me was, careful.
Uh-huh.
And it kind of made me mad because I thought,
Celebrate with
can
me.
you?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was kind of a big deal. And if I can do that, then,
Yeah.
And then, so last night you and I were talking about this before we hit record, but last night I was doing it again by myself, which I wasn't worried about at all. But everything just went so clumsily. It did not go smoothly. I was having problems. And I just kept thinking back to that moment with Neil when I was like, I feel so invincible. And he goes, careful.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yeah.
one of those, if a man thinks he stands,
Pride goes
take
before a
heed,
fall.
take heed. Yeah.
Well, some of that stuff's inevitable, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just experience, and you're getting experience, and you'll figure it out.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
So
So
she
we
hasn't
really
escaped
haven't,
anymore.
she hasn't escaped anymore. And she's still continuing to get to know us better. I think Neil is her favorite because she licks him. She'll come up and he says that her tongue feels like the harshest sandpaper
Sandpaper.
imaginable, but she'll come up and lick his boots. She'll lick his arm. She'll nudge him with her head.
She's
And
flirting with him.
she doesn't do that to me. She'll let me scratch her head. She lets me walk up to her, but she doesn't initiate. And she initiates it with Neil. So,
yeah. Are you afraid of her at all?
I'm not. I think it's because it's my job to spray her down with fly spray. After we're done with her, while she's still in the headlock eating, I brush her down and then I spray her with fly spray. And she hates that. She'll start swinging her tail at me. And 3 times now she's tried to kick me.
Why doesn't she not
Wow.
like it?
I don't know. I don't know if she just doesn't like
Cold or
the
something.
the feeling of it on her, but she'll start shivering and she'll start swatting that tail. And then when I walk behind her to the other side, she'll reach back and kick. And she hasn't made contact any of those times because I'm kind of ready for it. But I'm the one that does that. So I kind of feel like that makes me the bad guy. And so she likes Neil better. But anyway, I was thinking some of the things that I've been able to do this week was the whole purpose behind having this cow. And we made homemade pizza like we always do.
Ooh.
But I was trying to make every bit of it, as close to homemade as possible. So we don't grow our own grains, but I did freshly mill einkorn to make the crust. The pizza sauce that I put on it was pizza sauce that we had put out with our tomatoes and herbs. And then I put mozzarella cheese and ricotta cheese on it, both which I made from Peach's milk. And then topped it with basil when it came out, which we grow in our garden. So anyway, I was just looking at this and so filled with pride, that we sort of grew this pizza.
Yeah.
And even this morning, I made scrambled eggs, but I always put a little pat of butter in the pan, and it was our butter. They're our eggs. I mix the eggs with our milk, and it just makes me feel so good. I just grin so big. I'm like, look what we're eating.
That makes me think of, and I know every preacher has used this example, but John talks about gifts from God, and he's talking about salvation and how a lot of people want to say there's nothing that we do that has anything to do with salvation. And yet there are things that we do to satisfy what God asks of us. And we don't think of, like you're just talking about all those things that you've done. God provided for you, but you had to work to get them to come together and make what you were making. So that's fun. I did find something that I forgot that because it's still in the car, a thrift thing, and it's a pizza oven.
What?
Yeah, it's one of those. I looked it up. I don't know how to say it. It's Breville, Breville, but it comes from Williams Sonoma. Not that other people sell that brand, but this particular one, it looks like a great big waffle iron. So it's like 12 inches in diameter. It's heavy. And inside is a stone, like a pizza stone. And then there's underneath, when you take the stone out, there's like a burner, like a stove burner on the bottom. And then there's another one on the top. So you put it on the stone and then close the lid. And it's like a wood-fired oven kind of thing, except it's not wood-fired. So
So it's an
I'm
indoor.
right.
It's an indoor pizza oven. Oh,
Yeah.
have you tried?
So it's
So
not
have
wood
you tried
fired.
it yet?
I
No, it's
just
still in
found
the
it
car.
yesterday.
Still in the car.
Yeah. I
Ah,
ran by there yesterday. That old, what used to be a neighborhood Walmart down there at the
mhm.
end of Dartmouth
Right.
is now an ARC thrift store.
Oh,
So
no way. You have another
way.
thrift store.
So I have one that's right here, like,
Nice.
5 minutes away. So I ran in, I was looking for some coloring books to put on the kids' tables. And I just walked past it. I'm like, oh, well, that's worth, they wanted $15 for it. I thought that's worth it.
Ah,
Yeah. So I'll tell you how it goes. The stone needs to be scrubbed down. And I
mhm.
know that you're not supposed to use dish
Soap.
soap on it. You're just hot water, I guess.
Mhm.
So hopefully, and I haven't even plugged it in. Like I said, I left it in the car, but I'll let you know how it goes. I'm excited about that.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's
You want to
awesome.
drive to my house? You can take it home with you.
I do. Oh man,
Yeah.
that's great.
All of my kids, we've talked about this, all of my boys have pizza ovens,
Hmm.
the kind that are pellet fired. So this was electric, you plug it
Hmm.
in. So I doubt it will have the same taste as those good wood fired or pellet fired, whatever pizza ovens, but I'm excited.
So I'm
Mhm.
excited.
Yeah,
Yeah, you need to use it. I know you got a lectureship going on, but that's really secondary
I know.
to,
Pizza is
to
primary.
christening this pizza oven.
I'll send you a picture when we get off.
Yes, you will.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. What else you got?
That's all I got.
Well, I was going to tell you that this past Sunday was Mission Sunday that Bear Valley does, I think, once a year.
Hmm.
And Nate and Katie Miller came down, and they're a couple that we support, that Bear Valley supports. And they've been there, I want to say 3 years in Huron, South Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think South Dakota, I think of Laura Ingalls Wilder. Maybe she was North Dakota. She's one of the Dakotas. And I think of cold.
Mm-hmm.
And it is. I mean, I think they said it's basically you can't go outside to do anything for 7 months of the year. So that would be
Oh,
tough.
oh.
But I'm so proud of them. They just do such a good job, and they're always thinking outside the box of ways to draw the community in. They have like they had a toy drive kind of thing in December for Christmas for people who couldn't buy toys for their kids. They got people from the congregation to donate
Mm-hmm.
either new or used toys, and
Mm-hmm.
they spread them out on tables in the I guess whatever they call a room downstairs, basement room. And then they invited the community to come and buy, even though they weren't buying, it was free, toys for their kids for Christmas. And
That's a
he
great
said it,
idea.
they did it during, they thought no one would show up because huge snowstorm came that day. But he had a picture of the before and after, and almost all of them are gone. People came and
Mm.
did that. They have drive through hot dog days where just drive through, come by and get a hot dog. We'll pray with you.
Hmm.
Um, they do that with coffee and donuts and just different things that when they went there, I think there was about nine members of that congregation,
Mm-hmm.
and that may have even included he and Katie and Matt and Heather Jones were also there for a while, but they've moved. Um, but it just was so encouraging to see the things that they're doing there. And he's young; he's
Mm-hmm.
24, I want to
Yeah,
say,
they
something
both
like that.
are.
Yeah, she is too. They have
And
twin little boys. They're
mhm.
2 year olds, and they're so cute. One of them looks like Nate, one of them looks like Katie. But anyway, he spoke for class and kind of gave a report that morning, and then he preached that morning, did an excellent job. He's just a really good communicator. And then that night, we had ministry moments and invited them to come, and
Hmm.
John interviewed them in front of the students. And again, we're trying to get the students to understand the joy of ministry, although we don't want them to go into it thinking everything is peaches and cream. We do have some struggles sometimes, but it's like anything else. You work through the struggles,
Mhm.
and they do. And they have a lot of things against them as far as the dark and the weather, and they're far away from their family in Oklahoma. And Katie's got 2 kids on her lap during
Mhm.
worship and Nate's preaching, and yet they're pulling in these kids from the community. In fact, that's where they get most of their people, is kids in the community. They go get them and bring them to worship.
Hmm.
And so they're hoping to reach their parents too. But even if they don't reach parents, they're reaching those kids. And so that was something that was I just loved it. Sunday was so great because encouraging just to see the things that are being done for God's kingdom by young people, by people who have lots going on. It's not easy. And I guess that was the main thing. It's not easy what they're doing, but they're doing it and they're serving joyfully. And so I was just really encouraged by both Nate and Katie. And not
it's
just
exciting to hear. We got to know them because we were there when they came through the school, and it's so exciting to hear what couples are doing when they go off and they forge their way and and serve and they're cute. You mentioned they're twins, but they're cute.
Yeah, they are.
I've always thought that.
Yeah. And it was fun that night. After a lot of the students had gone home, and Nate and Katie were still here, and Katie and Colton Balance were here with their two. And so there was noise and kids playing and crying and bickering over toys, and we were just sitting around and enjoying it. And I imagine sometimes it just made me think that I know that parents who have little kids, it's when they go to someone's house, do we make them feel welcome? Do we make them feel like, oh, don't touch my stuff, or don't make sure you don't spill anything on my floor? And I don't ever want anyone to feel that way. And I pulled out that great big huge dollhouse that I don't know if you saw it when you were here. It's just something I found at Goodwill. It's like 4 feet tall. If it may even be a little bit taller. It's huge. And it's just always a hit when kids come over, and I've got some little doll furniture and dolls, and I pulled it out and put it in the middle of the floor, and they played with it for a long time. And then they were on to other stuff. But little Emily, she's just a little over a year, Katie and Colton's, she pulled that thing down on top of herself and scared everyone. But it landed, it's got 3 floors on it. The dollhouse does. But when it fell with her between the floors. It didn't, she wasn't even crying. I think it startled her, but it could have hurt. It wouldn't, I don't think it would have seriously hurt her, but it could have hurt her pretty good. And anyway, I was just so thankful that it landed with her between floors, and they lifted it up, and she was just kind of looking up like,
what just happened?
Yeah. Anyway, so Sunday.
Well, that reminds me that yesterday Rich was over here and he was in the high chair and he's not feeling good. He has a little cold and a fever and congestion and all that kind of stuff. So he's already kind of unhappy. But I don't even know if I was trying to pull him out or what I was doing. Emily was here too, but my ring, I'm not wearing my rings. My ring scratched him on the chin. Accidentally, and
just kills you.
Oh man. And he just kind of like he jerked his head a little bit, kind of like and he looked at me, and for a minute there was silence, and then it was like just, oh, kill me now.
It's like a knife to the heart.
I'm so sorry. I just was like, I did not mean to do that. It was terrible.
Did you ever clip your kids' fingernails and draw blood when they were babies with the little baby clippers?
No, but I've done that with my dog.
Slightly different, but
it is. Still felt bad, Carla.
I know, Ollie. We love Ollie too. Yeah, well, I remember doing that to one of my kids, and I just wanted to like cut myself because I felt so bad.
Oh man.
They look at you with these accusing eyes.
I know.
What you just did to me.
Why did you hurt me? I thought you loved me.
Yeah. Well, I hope he feels better. That's the first time is just awful. And you were mentioning that he can't breathe so that makes nighttime rough if they suck their thumb or suck a pacifier and they can't breathe through it.
Yeah, I don't think Emily's getting much sleep right now.
Yeah. How's she feeling, by the way?
She's feeling good.
Good. Well, she's gonna be busier in a year. Yes, less than a year.
Yes.
It's gonna be fun.
It's gonna be amazing.
Well, I forgot to start the timer when we started talking. I started it 12 minutes ago, but we had been talking at least 10 minutes before that. So
okay.
I've got a picnic to get to. So unless you have something else, get our topic going. Okay. Well, today we're going to, there was one other thing I was going to tell you. It kind of ties in with what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
I wrote it in the wrong place. And I was looking at my list going, I knew I had something else I was going to tell you about. I happened to be scrolling through Facebook one day and noticed that Shelley Guthrie had shared a book that she was reading that she said she loved. and it's called These Is My Words by Nancy Turner. These Is My Words.
Okay.
And I think Shelley said it was one of her favorite books ever, which, she's a bookworm. You can tell by her Facebook. And so I was in between books and I downloaded that, and I am like, it's kind of like you were saying a minute ago, lectures are primary, but I'm like glued to this book. It's about, it is so good. It's set like the 1880s and about a family that started out, I want to say from Arizona, and they were going to go east, like go towards, I want to say Arkansas or somewhere like that. And all of the trouble that they had with Indians on the way or Native Americans or whatever we call them. They were Indians then, Apaches and Comanches, and struggles that they had getting that far. And then when they got there, several people had died, and they ended up turning around and going back. And it's just been really good, and it's clean and interesting and kind of challenges my soft side. Like, I have it easy. Don't have to think about encountering. I mean, I know we have to be safe, but it's just really good. So These Is My Words.
Who was the author?
Nancy Turner. So what we're going to talk about today is and you came up with this title, I think is good. It's Wisdom Lit, which is a class that is offered in lots of places. I know that Corey Sawyers teaches Wisdom Lit here. It's talking about Psalms and Proverbs and other books that are considered wisdom literature. But this was an idea that I had about things that we come across in books that we find bits of wisdom. And I thought it was interesting when you and I were talking about it, because I like to read fiction mostly, and I use nonfiction, but I don't sit down to read it very often. And then you are kind of just the opposite. You sit down to read nonfiction, and you use fiction to put you to sleep, it sounds like.
Yeah, I read fiction at night. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty much, it's an escape for me, I guess. Not like I need an escape from my life, but it's just, I just enjoy getting caught up in a story. So I have lots and lots and lots of books over the years that I've read. And I've always highlighted things. And back when I was reading paper books, which I've read electronic books for a while now, I wouldn't necessarily always have a pencil that I would underline, but I would dog ear something. And don't anybody get mad at me for that. Just everybody can do what they want to do with their own books. But I would like to go back and look the things that kind of made an impression on me, whether it was, I can relate to that, or wow, that's a really good quote, or just things like that stood out to me that I learned from. And but now I read electronic books. I put things on my iPad and read either on the Kindle app or on the Apple Books app, and I can easily, you just put your finger on it and highlight it and make it a color. And so you can look back at those books and find, without even having to scroll through, there's a little, place you could tap, and it shows you all of the different things you've highlighted. So I have found so many different quotes and things that made me really think from different books, and not necessarily from the Bible. Of course, everything good. And even these quotes that I came up with today, you can trace them back to biblical wisdom. But there are a lot of things in secular books that have wisdom in them. And so I thought we each found 3 different things out of books. Mine all came from Jan Karon, who wrote the Mitford series. And I know you've read quite a few of hers. I've read every book in her Mitford series. And we've talked about her before. She's a great fiction writer, and just very entertaining and heartwarming. And there's just so many things I come across in her books that I just think, wow, that's just really wise. And so that's what we're going to share today. And mine, like I said, all come from Jan Karon. And do yours come from different sources or all the same book?
Different sources.
Okay. But that's what we're going to talk about with our topic. So we'll start with you and let you give the first one.
Well, my first one comes from a book that I've probably already referenced about 3 times on this podcast, and it's the one I'm currently reading, The Life-Giving Table by Sally Clarkson.
Okay.
And this is one of those books that I'm keeping upstairs in our home library. When Neil and I have a few minutes to go up there, this is the one I pick up and read. And I feel like after every chapter, I have said something to him about it, that she has said that I thought was so good. So I knew that I wanted to grab something from this book. So I'm going to share just something brief that she wrote. I jotted down the page number. Okay. And she's talking about how people talk about the whole premise of the book is using your home for discipleship, helping people grow closer to the Lord. And she, in this chapter, she's talking about how people talk about, how do you have time for that? Do you and your family just sit around and drink tea all day long, having spiritual discussions? So she's talking about the real practical side of it. Because no, of course they don't. And no family can.
Yeah.
So here's what she said. Christians sometimes feel a pressure to be spiritual, she put that in quotes, all the time. But to separate the spiritual from the ordinary is to say that Jesus is not king over those everyday moments in life. We should learn from Jesus to embrace the mundane moments, even the silly fun ones, and find God's fingerprints of grace within them. If we can do this, we will learn to see God in a fuller dimension. Jesus didn't come just to save our souls. He came to redeem every part of our lives. When we give our whole lives to him, food, drink, work, play, body, spirit, family, we glorify God by living into the beauty he meant for us. And then she goes on to say, I'll just share this one more paragraph. Not all holy moments are somber and serious. If Jesus discipled his apostles in the midst of food, drink, laughter, and mundane moments, I believe we should too. Instead of viewing them as spiritual downtime, we should see them as the times when God is most likely to work. Our laughter can glorify God as much as our thoughtful meditation. Our cheerful performance of mundane tasks like vacuuming can honor God as much as our faithful church attendance. Serving pizza to a house full of teenagers can strike spiritual gold. We must learn to cherish all the moments of our lives and to call them holy. So I do want to clarify that she's not, or I don't know what she's saying, but not to say that all life is worship, because I think worship is something very intentional that we do when we set aside a time to honor God. But she is saying that as we're bringing God into our marriages and our families and our homes, instead of being so overwhelmed by all of our responsibilities to where we don't feel like we have time for those spiritual training moments, let God be a part of every moment. And the joyful moments, the happy moments, the chores, the dinner table, riding in the car to do errands, and it should happen more organically and more naturally in that way. And how often does God come up in conversation in just those ordinary moments? And that you can make a bigger deal out of those types of situations, out of the dinner table, for God and his impact on your life than maybe sometimes we have, because we're so compartmentalized, it seems like sometimes in our schedules. And this is church time or this is devotional time, and those times are good, but maybe see it more overall in the everyday. And I'm probably not explaining that as well as if you had read her whole chapter.
No, I get exactly what you're talking about. And it makes me think of every part of our life should honor God. Everything that we do. In fact, last night we talked about walking with God. Lori's class, she brought up Enoch and how he walked with God, but she defined what that word walk meant, and how we walk around daily, just how we live. And this is something I was going to bring up later, Ephesians, that talks about walking worthily in a way that you recognize the worth of what God did for you. But we don't just walk in our worship. We don't just walk in our prayer. We walk every day throughout the day. How we live our life should show how we feel about God. So don't you think that's what she's meaning?
I do. And you've probably seen that illustration. People have the pie chart and the percentages. Here's work, here's family, here's, worship or Christianity, or And instead of it being a pie chart, it should be that wagon wheel with the spoke.
Mm-hmm.
Christ is at the center of it all.
Yeah.
And I've seen that before, but I found this chapter particularly encouraging because I think when things get so busy, I'm always looking forward to that time when things slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Because when that time comes, then I'll be able to do this. Then I'll be able to focus more on this. Maybe it's a study that I'm wanting to do for my own personal devotional benefit. Maybe it's something that I want to look into that's a good thing or an opportunity. Or, when things slow down, at some
Yeah.
point, I want to do this. And instead, I feel like this encourages me to say, this is that point.
Mm-hmm.
This
You're
is
living
life.
it.
This is
Mm-hmm.
life. And these are those opportunities.
Yeah.
So I can sit here and stress and fret or wring my hands and think, well, when things slow down, or I can step back and take a breath and give it over to God and ask for him to help me see these are the moments.
Mm-hmm.
And what am I doing with those moments? How am I using even the obligations and responsibilities or the vacuuming to glorify God,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something to contemplate and pray about.
It's a mindset. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you just have to have your mind set on
Mm-hmm.
acceptance, I think is one thing that
Mm-hmm.
there is only so much I can do. And there's this and this and this I can't change, whatever's busy that's going on. These are things that I have to do. I have to well, I was fixing to say get through, but I think that's what you're talking about. What
Mm-hmm.
you're focusing on is not something to just get through, but something to do for God's glory in whatever we do. So
Yeah,
set
and
our
not
minds
that
on that.
here's this busy time and I need to add in something to do for God's glory, but how am I using what I'm already doing
Mm-hmm.
in this busy time?
Yeah.
How
There's
am I
probably some
turning that? And a lot of it has to do with my attitude.
right.
Am I grumbling about this or am I seeing the beauty in it?
Mm-hmm.
The providence, the influence, the relationships, whatever it might be. It's
Mm-hmm.
like you say, it's a mindset, I think.
I think probably looking back on my young mom days, it's hard sometimes to feel like you're really making a difference in the
Mm-hmm.
world, especially for people who really have that need, or God created them this way to feel like they need to make a difference. And when you're changing diapers and wiping noses and not talking to anyone except a 3-year-old, it can be kind of tough to feel like you're making a difference. But when you step back and realize,
Mm-hmm.
the hand that rocks the cradle really does rule the world, and in a good way, you're affecting the future of someone else, and
Mm-hmm.
by this person that you're raising. And like, it's just a mindset. What I'm doing, I'm glorifying God. Even something like changing a diaper, you're caring for your child. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a huge thing that God wants us to do. So that also made me think about what we were talking about before we hit record, when you were saying that Neil is praying for ordinary things.
Mm-hmm.
And that fits in so well here. Things that we
Mm-hmm.
think maybe we shouldn't bother God with,
Yeah.
but I don't think that's how God sees it. We're, like you were saying, we're talking to him, we're communicating with
Mm-hmm.
him, and he wants to hear from us.
It seems like such a trivial part of life, but it is life and it's our God-given life.
Mm-hmm.
And why not talk to him about all of it and turn all of it over to him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what a great book. I
Mm-hmm.
have
It is.
not, I've looked for that on shelves at the thrift stores, but probably not going to find it there, because that's something I don't think I want on an ebook. I think I would rather have that in a
Mm-hmm.
hard copy. So
Yes, and I may have said this on here already. I'm almost at the end of it. There's my bookmark right there for those of
mm-hmm.
you who are watching. And I already know I have not been going through with a highlighter, but I told Neil, I already know as soon as I finish, I'm starting right back at the beginning, highlighter in hand, just so I can
Mm-hmm.
focus more on some of these things. And I really do wish that I had read it years and years. I mean, I don't know. Let's see. It came out in 17. So I couldn't have read it years
Yeah.
and years and years ago. But
Mm-hmm.
I wish I'd read something like this, when I was just starting out and creating my own home. And raising children. She really has a lot of good practical things in there.
Good. Good.
Mm-hmm.
Good one.
Thank you.
Okay. Like I
What's
said,
your first one?
all of mine come from Jan Karen, her Mitford series, and I don't think they're all from the same book. They're not all from the same book, but the first one is a very brief quote, but she says this, and I don't remember the context. This is, it's a story, so it's fiction, but she said, "I've seen how we can define ourselves by how we've been wounded. In every way, unforgiveness makes us the victim."
Mm.
And I thought, it just sometimes you have to kind of sit with something and think about it. And that was one of those that I just had to kind of stop and go, ouch. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. That's good.
Just read it again. "I've seen how we can define ourselves by how we've been wounded. In every way, unforgiveness makes us the victim." I thought there's kind of three different parts to that quote. First of all, how do we define ourselves? Secondly, how we've been wounded, because there's other ways we can define ourselves than by our wounds. But then, what wraps it all up is how unforgiveness makes us the victim. So that first part, how do we define ourselves? And when I was kind of jotting some notes down, and I wrote, "When others think of me, they see." And then I thought, that's not even it. It's not about how others see me. It's how do I define myself? So who am I? What do when I think of me overall, what do I feel about myself? How do I feel about myself? And something that I have tried not to do, but it's really hard not to do, is to define our life in the last several years by what happened to John, his cardiac event, because there's so many things, thoughts and feelings and emotions, and even hate to use the word trauma, but it's there, things that came out of that. But when I really focus on it, John doesn't really like it when I say it this way, but good things. I learned some really, really hard, good things, and it was really empowering. Someone this weekend, and I don't remember who it was, but they were talking about how coming out the other side of something really hard is truly empowering, because we've seen God in a tough way, in a hard way, and we see how he provides. That's secondary. So what I'm basically trying to say by that is that I really struggle not to define myself by that, that I learn things from it, but that's not who I am. It's not me being traumatized by that, or John being living traumatized by that. But I think, I have defined myself as being his wife, John's wife, or Jordan, Jacob, Micah's mom. I was that for a long time. I was Carl and Janice's daughter. Then I was John's wife. Then I was Jordan, Jacob, Micah's mom. But
your roles.
Yeah, they were the roles that I had. So who am I? That's for the first part of that quote, defining ourselves, but then defining ourselves by how we've been wounded. So this, I started looking into the victim mentality, because that's where I think most of our wounds come from, is when we feel like we've been victimized or we've had bad things happen to us. So I was jotting down some things that I think what the victim mentality looks like to me, and jump in here if you think of things. But someone who has this victim mentality, they might say that bad things always happen to me. And they might tend to think that nothing is ever their fault, or they don't have any responsibility in things that happen to them. I think they have a defeatist attitude. Like, why should I even try? Because these kind of things always happen and I can't do anything about it. People who feel like they are victimized or have suffered at the hands of others, they tend to minimize positive things and focus on negative things. I have seen too, this may be a generalized statement, but people who have this victim mentality, they don't really ask you about you. They're just more interested in talking about things that happen to them. They feel like they've got it harder than everyone else. Sometimes they might shut down efforts to point out, when we try to point out to someone else something good that happened, they don't want to hear that. they feel like they don't trust too many people. So, those are things that happen when we feel like we've been wounded or victimized by someone. So that would be the second part of the statement. And then the third part is that unforgiveness makes us the victim. And I think that that's a choice. And why is it that every time we tend to talk about this, forgiveness, people say, I can't forgive when God hasn't forgiven. Mm-hmm. And that is not what I'm talking about. I am talking about when we've been offended or if we've had our feelings hurt. We can make a choice to hang on to that, or we can choose to let it go. So those are just kind of my initial thoughts about that quote. And I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, the victim thing makes me think about those, people who have been hurt or have been experienced horrible things. And sometimes you just forget about it because they're not focused on it. They're not absorbed with it. And then you also know people that they will never let you forget about it because they always bring it up. Every conversation, it doesn't matter what it's about, somehow it's going to be brought up. It's like that worn coat. It's that worn, comfortable coat that they are not going to take off because it is always with them and always a part of them. And yeah, like you say, it's become who they are. And when you said that they don't ask about you, sometimes it blinds them to even the hurts of others. And they even might hear it mentioned or announced and they don't acknowledge it, but they're still bringing up whatever they've experienced themselves, and I just think I don't think they ever do that intentionally, which is sobering, because how many times do we let something become our identity without realizing it?
Yeah.
And that when people are around us, they know this is going to come up in conversation. Maybe it's not a victim thing. I'm not trying to get too far off track, but is it hitting a little close to home here? How busy you are?
Yeah.
Are you always going to bring that up? Woe is me. Is it, what is it about you that becomes your identity because you are always going to bring that up? And is it a good thing? Is it your relationship with Christ that you're always going to bring up? And so that's who you are, or something else?
Yeah. And I was thinking this follows very similar lines that what we were talking about a couple episodes ago with how to be miserable. And that's what she's saying here. How unforgiveness makes us the victim when all we can focus on is what's happened to us, the bad things that have happened to us. The bottom line, I was trying to think, who am I? And what do we focus on, and how do we live our lives? And recognizing that, I'm a child of God. And when you think of, see if I can say this correctly, a lot of people are really taken by famous people, whether it's, internationally famous movie stars or someone we consider to be well known in the community or in the brotherhood or whatever.
Status.
And you have a conversation with them and they know your name. And you're like, you're so starstruck because, and I may be this a little bit with Dan Winkler because I just adore him and he always remembers my name. And I just think, I don't ever think of him as being wanting that. That's just who he is. So that's just a side note. But how much more I look out the window and I see mountains and I think, the God that formed those mountains knows my name and knows everything about me. And he wants to know me. He wants me to have a relationship with him. He's open to it. And it's up to me to take his hand and have that relationship with us. And so to me, the bottom line about this is that we have to know who we are and we have to find our identity in Christ. And knowing the worth of what he did for us and knowing the worth of the fact that he wants to know who we are. Obviously he knows everything about us, but he wants that relationship. And sometimes that just blows my mind that he wants a relationship with me. But I was looking at Ephesians 1 and thinking about how Paul opened so many of his letters to the churches that he adored. And you especially see it with the church of Philippi, but I focused on the opening to Ephesians and all of the things that Paul pointed out that we have. And we have these because we are members of the same body that those people belong to. And Paul says that God blessed us with every spiritual blessing, that God chose us before the foundation of the world, that God adopted us. He adopted us through Jesus and by the kind intention of his will. So he wanted us to be part of his family. And it says that God freely bestowed grace on us. And another verse, it says that he lavished that grace on us. It says that God redeemed and he forgave us. God gave us an inheritance. We are part of God's body. And I just think when we look at all of those things that God did for me and for you, then how can we live being identified by these trivial hurts that others inflict on us? Or, so what? Someone hurt your feelings? I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit callous, but so what? Because you have God's grace. You can lose it. You can walk away from it when you turn your back on God. And sometimes I feel like when we do focus on all of these, everything except for him, we are turning our back on him. I know we have to be careful how we say that, but all of these things, and that's just one little section of scripture that talks about how God feels about us and what God's done for us. And the whole Bible is about that story of the lengths that God went to have fellowship with us. So what if someone did something to you and it's almost like we've got blinders on and all we can see is all we want to see. So I guess I think, what do you want to see? And then a little further in that book in Ephesians 4 is when Paul, he begs us to walk in a manner worthy of the calling that we've been called. And that's not walking perfectly. That's not what that's about. It's not being worthy of the sacrifice. It's knowing that the worth of what he did for us. So to me, is this offense against me? Is this obsession that I have with whatever someone else did or the bad things that always happen to me? Is it worth all of that distraction? Is it worth all that brain space? Or am I showing God that I understand the worth of what he did for me?
Is it making you happier? Is it making it easier for you to heal?
Mm-hmm.
We've been studying First Peter on Monday nights at Lehman Avenue, and he's talking to them about suffering for doing right, and he keeps pointing them back to Jesus. And look at him. He was perfect. He suffered, but he didn't revile in return. He keeps pointing back to that example. And it's the same thing. Instead of focusing on your wound, focus on Jesus and the great physician, the healer, and let him take you in and comfort and heal your heart and make you his. I did a Bible marking not too long ago called "You Are," from all the "You Are" statements in the Bible, because it seems like we're kind of infatuated with this idea of being labeled, like all those fun little quizzes you can take online to tell you your personality type or your decoration style or your, you name it.
Yeah.
You can find it. And it's fun to do those things, but God tells us who we are in many places in the word. And when we focus on those, we start living up to that identity in him.
Yeah. The way you said that, you keep pointing us to Christ, and which is what we want this whole podcast to be about. But I'm thinking about this quote and so God wants us to keep looking at him, but the devil wants us to keep looking at ourselves. And he wants to keep us looking down and keep us looking in this life and not looking to the next life. So let's be defined by what God's done for us and who we are to him, rather than what has happened to us in this life and how other people have offended us. It's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. So that's my first one.
Really good one. My second one is from the 7 Laws of the Learner. And we did a podcast episode just on books that we liked. And it seems like that was early on. So if you haven't listened to that, you guys can go back and listen to that one. I think I've mentioned this book in that particular episode. But there's a chapter in here where he's talking about, as the whole premise is, it's for teachers, but it could be just influencing anybody. You know, maybe you do have an opportunity to teach children's classes or other class settings, or you're in the education system or whatever, but it's all about making an impact as a teacher and different ways to do that. And the author really puts the emphasis on the teacher herself, and how, you know, sometimes you'll say, that guy is so smart. You know, I didn't understand a word that he said, but he's so smart. Well, if you didn't understand a word that he said, then he failed, because it's the teacher's responsibility to teach and to make sure learning takes place. So that's kind of the whole premise of this book, just to give it some context. But page 156. Here's what I wanted to share. He's talking about in the chapter on application. Application that has impacted the teacher tends to impact the student. So this chapter is talking about how they need to see whatever we're trying to teach. And in our case, of course, we're thinking about God's word, how it's made a difference in our own lives and how we're living it out for it to impact the student.
Can you read it again? Application says, he says what?
Application that has impacted the teacher tends to impact the student.
Okay.
And he asked the question, do you practice what you preach, or do you just like to preach? And do you just lecture about the truth, or do you live the truth? Romans 15:18, for I will not dare to speak of any of those things which Christ has not accomplished through me in word and deed. And then he says, both the life and lips of the teacher communicate truth. When they communicate the truth in harmony, so your life is teaching something.
Yeah.
When they communicate the truth in harmony, the power of God is freely unleashed through the teacher of God. And I think, that's all I wanted to mention from those pages. But he was talking about different practical steps that you can take to make that happen anytime you're in a teaching situation, a lecture, you know, like your lectureship this weekend, or the classroom setting. And he says, live with that text for at least a week before you teach it. Live with that text and pray about that text, and that it'll impact your own life, that God will use it to change your life. And, you know, and pray that whole week leading into the classroom, because your students will see that. And he used the example of when Moses came down off the mountain, you know, his face shone from having been with the presence of God, that they should see your face shining with the truth of what you're teaching when you come into the classroom. So it's really good. It really does put a reminder of the importance of practicing what we preach, you know, living what we teach. And I think it is easy sometimes to just focus on, at least for me, I shouldn't say we, I should say focus on, I want to do a good job. I want this to be a good lesson, and I want to do a good job presenting it. And I want to make sure I'm handling my subject or my assignment accurately, or, you know, all those kinds of worries and things can sometimes get in the way of me just focusing on, this word is living and powerful. And am I letting it change my own life in such a way that whoever I'm talking to can see that, to give the word more power and meaning, you know? And I don't want people to say, oh, she did a good job. You want them to see the power of the truth and the living word and what that can do for their lives. So I thought this really good chapter.
What is that quote? Isn't it from Neil? Or maybe he shared it from somebody else, that you don't want them to say, oh, what a good job you did, but oh, what a good God we serve, or something like that.
Not, oh, what a preacher, but oh, what a savior.
Yeah. That's it. Well, you can't help when something really makes an impression on you, when you've experienced something in your own life, or when you feel something. I mean, we tell people when they need to give a devotional and they don't, you know, they're not given an assignment. Well, what do you feel strongly about? And because it makes more, I think it makes us more effective in what we have to say when it means more to us. Maybe we've gone through something personally that showed us the truth of a certain passage, and so we can speak to that with more authority, maybe because we've lived it, like you were saying, live with it for a week. But yeah, I think when it just makes so much more of an impact when people can see in us that we have been impacted by ourselves, which is that's just what you said. But I
And
understand.
it's nothing surprising. I mean, we know that's the case and that's how it should be. But, he also, as to what you were saying just now, in that same chapter, he goes on to say, when that's the case and you've lived the text, you've lived with the text, it makes it more real. And when you're talking about it, it'll be more real as a part of your own life. It'll bring out the joy. It'll bring out the tears. It'll bring out living examples in your own life, that people are interested in and seeing the impact. But I thought it interesting that he also puts a caution in there. When you're teaching, you want it to be real and share personal examples. And he says, but don't overdo that because the show is not about you.
Right.
It's about God. So don't overdo and make it all about you when you're teaching. But at the same time, it should be a natural outflow of the text that you're teaching because you're trying to practice what you preach.
Yeah. I always find it interesting when people give personal examples. But I can see what you're saying, not to overdo it, not to make it all about them, but it just makes it, I guess, more real to me when I know, oh, well, they've lived through cancer. I think you have a little more credibility to speak about things that you've lived through. So.
Well, I was also reading through this book. It's called Made to Stick. And it's how to get across an idea or principle that's memorable, and it's really kind of like an advertising slant, how to come up with something that people will remember. But in that book, they talk about how people are always more interested in names and people than in concepts. So you can share a concept, but if you give an example and an illustration with a person, people memorable. Tune in and they listen. And they don't forget it.
Yeah. Good one. I think I have this, John and I disagree a little bit on advertisements for whether it's, Bible passages, trying to get out there what we're doing. And sometimes he'll want to put a picture of something in Israel, just a site. And I think it needs people in it because I look for faces and I look for, it just makes it more real. And it doesn't have to be us, but just people that have been there, maybe, people from groups. So yeah, I think you remember it more.
They say artwork is more moving if it has life in it, not just as object, a still object or whatever, but a plant, a person, an animal, a tree, something living has more of an impact.
Okay, good one.
Thanks.
All right. My second one is kind of a tough one. But I've thought of this. I read this, I don't know how many years ago, at least 10 years ago. And I've thought of it over and over and over and over since then. It's just one sentence. And she says, children do not need to bear the burden of grown-up craziness. And it's not talking about mental illness. I do want to say that because when that's involved, it's a little out of our control. And I know that there are things that we can do to help in that situation. But so I'm setting that aside. I'm not talking about any type of mental illness because there's a lot of that. And our hearts hurt for people and the children of people who are going through that because that's difficult. But I'm talking about different situations in life. And I jotted down several. The first one that always comes to my mind is divorce situations and conflict between parents. Maybe even it doesn't even go as far as divorce, but conflict between parents, and how when we do that, and you'll see this over and over, we're like we're asking our children to choose a side between two people that they love. And it's just such a sad thing to see. I think we've talked about this before. Not sure if it's been on the podcast, but it's a tough, really tough and hard thing to watch. But there's a series called Oh, watch now. I can't even think of the name of the series, but it's about addiction. What is it when you have a confrontation with someone, a planned confrontation? What is that word?
Oh, intervention.
Intervention. That's the
Yeah.
name of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about people who have addictions. And most of the time it's alcohol or drugs. Sometimes it's other things. And even though it's pretty adult, as I use that word loosely, it's hard to watch and it's adult content. We had our boys to watch some of them to show the consequences of addiction and the things that when you put these things into your body, what are the consequences that come from it. And we tried to use that as a motivator to not go and do any of those kinds of things, and they haven't. But in almost every situation, the first part of the hour program, they're interviewing people about this person who's struggling with this addiction. And almost every time there's a divorce that's taken place. I mean, almost every time.
Oh, wow.
And when you think about what children are going through when their parents are going through divorce, and I know sometimes it has to happen. And we won't even go down that road about how it doesn't always have to happen, but it does. But there's just so much bitterness in parents who are divorcing. And I know there are some that can do it without that, but it's very, very, very infrequent. And when you have loved someone and given your life to them, and maybe they betray you or whatever situation it is, it rips you up.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got to do whatever we can to prevent that from spilling over to our kids.
Mm-hmm.
That's one example to me of grown-up craziness. Not inflicting that on our kids. Another one that I thought of was perfectionism, and how this trickles down to our kids,
because we expect right there.
But when we expect so many things from ourselves, perfection, do we expect those same things? Even if we don't expect them from our kids, do they think we do? Then I thought about bitterness against God and how maybe things have happened in our lives that have caused us to be bitter toward God. What do we do that communicates that to our kids, that they're coming up with their own bitterness against God? Why would we inflict that on them? Our own lack of faith. Why would we put that in the laps of our kids? Then I thought another huge one, and this steps on my toes, is my fears. Crazy fears that I have that we, they're not passed on genetically, but we pass them on because we're afraid. I tend to be afraid of water as far as ocean,
bodies
drowning.
Of water. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Not fear of water in general. And so when it came time for the boys to learn how to swim, I was afraid. John taught them how to swim. I still don't really know how to swim. I could float for a really long time, but I can't swim very well. But so did I pass that on to them? Maybe my fear of failure. Have I passed that on to my kids? Social phobias. I think this is a big one because for parents who are very introverted and they stay home or they don't want to be around other people, that gets passed on to our kids, whether it's intentional or not. I don't ever think it's intentional. It's unintentional. So, and anxieties that we have, just the fact that we live with anxiety, and not talking about clinical depression, things like that. But when we are constantly anxious about the next thing we're doing, or we're anxious about their grades, or we're anxious about a doctor visit, whatever we're anxious about, I think that gets passed on. Our anger issues. If we blow up, do we think it's okay to just blow up and then they're okay? I remember there was some kind of technique, I guess, when I was a kid, that they would tell parents to let your kids beat up on a pillow, get it all out, beat up on a pillow. And my mom was like, because that's just reinforcing hitting on something. But so anger issues. What if we had our own bad experiences with dating? And then like we pass that on to our kids. Sorry, you're not going to date till you're 40 years old. Sorry. Or you're not going to date at all. Maybe women have bad experiences with men. And so we inflict that on our daughters, and we make them feel like there is no trustworthy man out there. So what do you think?
Yeah, the first one that came to my mind was just drama in general. When I think of grown up craziness, drama at the workplace, drama with church family, drama in the marriage. So easy to get caught up in some of that stuff. And while we're working through it, in our aggravation, frustration, or whatever it might be, our kids don't need to hear about that. No. They don't need to get caught up in that and involved in all of that. And it's not that we're trying to bring them up in this bubble, isolated bubble where they don't experience life, but there's a difference between navigating through life as a Christian and bringing them into our craziness, like you were saying from the quote, and exposing them to all of those things.
Well, part of our job as a parent, to me, is protecting them from a lot of these things, and setting aside our own, whether it's a fear or an anger or bitterness, whatever. We don't have to tell our kids everything. They don't have to know everything that's going on. In fact, I think we really should not. Just sorry for the visual picture, but vomit everything that's in our mind onto our kids. They deserve our protection. So, to me, I think we've got to work on overcoming our fears, or at the very least, recognize what they are and be aware that I struggle with this, and to try to protect my child from struggling with the same thing. And maybe, really be intentional about instilling confidence in our kids. Instead of instilling fear, we instill confidence and say, you can do this. I believe in you, and protecting them from this grown-up craziness, because it just gets passed down and passed down and passed down and passed down. So determine that it's going to end here, and I'm going to do better. So
yeah, because the fallout from that is you're shaping how they view the world, God's world.
Yes.
And how they respond to situations that are negative, that are going to happen. And I've said this on here before, but when I was growing up, my dad was a preacher, and I know they experienced things that weren't good. They had to have, and because you're in the Lord's church and you're dealing with people, but they never talked about that around us.
Yeah.
And they never, ever said anything negative about the eldership, about the Lord's church, about deacons. They just didn't do that. And always had a good attitude and enthusiastic, looking forward to being with God's people, looking forward to doing this. And I feel like that really shaped me and my view of the Lord's church.
Right.
Whereas if they were the types that, on the way home, I cannot believe he said this to me. I cannot believe they expect me to do this. I cannot, if I grew up hearing that, how that would have shaped ministry in general, or having respect for elderships or anything like that. It impacted me.
And not just our view of the world or the church, but our view of God. And I know we're not addressing this to fathers, this podcast for women, but I think that women can shape how their husbands portray themselves, or not portray themselves, but how they are to their kids. Because if an earthly dad is harsh and critical and judgmental and punitive and aloof or passive, all of these qualities that God is not. If an earthly father is that way, is that the picture that our kids are going to have of who God is? Because that's their dad. And isn't he our father? Is he the same way as my dad is? Yeah. So it's sobering. It's a sobering thing to consider, that children do not need to bear the burden of grown-up craziness. So it's not, but it's intentionally not being selfish, really. Bottom line is that, I may feel this way. I may have had this happen to me, whatever, but I'm not going to burden my children with that. So that's it.
That's good. Okay. My last one It's from a book called Staying Close, Stopping the Natural Drift Toward Isolation in Marriage. And I think I've mentioned this one on here also. It's by Dennis and Barbara Rainey. And this one, I want to share the title of this chapter is You Can't Be Selfish in a Three-Legged Race.
That's a mental picture.
Yes, it is. And I love that. And so the author talks about how, when you go to these little outdoor fairs or whatever, and they have the three-legged race. Well, sometimes to make the game more interesting, it says partners were often tied together so one faced backward and the other forward.
Ooh,
have you ever seen that? I've never
no.
actually seen that done.
That's a recipe for disaster in my life.
Exactly. And that's the point that he's making. He said, what happened next would be best described as chaos. Everyone would cheer as the forward-facing participants would half drag, half carry their backward-facing teammate toward the finish line. There would always be plenty of grass-stained knees, piercing screams, and roars of laughter. And then they said, but sometimes the pair would face the same direction. Even then, the three-legged race was difficult, but at least some partners could work together. Locked arm in arm, stepping in unison, they could make rapid progress toward the finish line. They might still stumble and fall along the way, but they always got there much faster and more efficiently. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, the chapter is talking about unity in marriage, being on the mm-hmm. same team, knowing that you're both going the same direction and have the same goals. And he says, marriage is a lot like that three-legged race. You can run it facing the same direction and try to stay in step with your partner, or you can run it facing in totally different directions. Two people going their own selfish, separate ways can never hope to experience the oneness of marriage that God intended. And then one more little thing. He said, if we live our lives for ourselves, thinking only of our selfish desires and interests, in the end, God gives us exactly what we wanted, ourselves. That's all we're left with is ourselves. Yeah. And how fun is that? That's lonely. Marriage provides the opportunity to live life for someone besides yourself and to avoid that terrible judgment. All I've got is me. I can't depend on anyone else. You must first give up your will to Christ, and then you will find it possible to give up your will for that of your mate. So the whole chapter is, and it kind of builds off of the one that you just shared. It's really a matter of being unselfish for the good of everybody involved, but particularly in marriage. The whole chapter is arm in arm, going the same direction, facing the same goal. It's going to make your marriage a lot smoother because there's no room for selfishness in a three-legged race.
That's kind of what you were talking about with an example that is made to stick right there, that visual image.
Yes.
My cousin Natalie has shared a quote, and I don't remember exactly how it goes, but she talking about marriage. We have to remember that we're on the same side of the battlefield and remember who the enemy is. And I think we lose track of that. I know I do sometimes, because John is not my enemy, though sometimes, we've had conflicts that made it seem like I thought he was my enemy. But it's bringing it back to realizing we are on the same side of this field. And who is happy when we're fighting against each other? It's the devil. He wants us to be fighting against one another. So and thinking about, on a football field, are you going the same direction as your teammates, or do you accidentally, we've seen before when kids actually accidentally run the other way and score a touchdown for the other team because they're going the wrong way. But yeah, that's great. A great mental image.
Well, and I appreciate the fact that he mentioned it doesn't mean that you won't stumble. It's, if you've ever participated in a three-legged race, it's still tricky. Because you're still two different individuals. You're not one individual, you're two, but you're tied together. And, you probably will be clumsy. Sometimes you probably will fall, but it's a lot easier to run that going the same direction than one of you turned around the other way, one of you practicing selfishness. Remembering instead that you're on the same team. And when we argue and fight, we're pitting ourselves against each other. We're warring against each other. As you said, that's exactly what Satan wants.
Yeah. And that applies to church family too, or just the church as a whole. When we're so busy fighting against each other, then we've forgotten who the enemy is.
Mm-hmm.
We're not enemies with fellow members of the church. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
well, thinking about John and I running that was on our very first date, that Sadie Hawkins Day picnic that we went on. They had I have a picture of us in a 3-legged race. Usually you put your feet in a burlap sack, right? But we had ours tied together.
Yeah.
Of course, he is about a foot taller than me. And yeah, that was a disaster. But if you know, there's maybe another analogy. If you know what your weaknesses are, the fact that one of you is taller, one of you is shorter, and that one of you is faster, and one of you is slower, then you can prepare more. So maybe think
and
about
kind of compensate for that.
Prepare for it. Yeah. Okay, that's a good one.
What's your
That was your third one? Okay, my last one is another, of course, from Jan Karen. And she says, we don't have to do great things to make a difference. We can make a great difference by doing small things graciously. And I love that because, when I think about myself, I think, who am I to do anything? Who like Ken, we were talking about, was it last week or the week before? I don't know that anybody is really interested in anything that I have to say. So it's kind of when you don't really feel like you have a voice or that you're worthy to have a voice, or for whatever reason, I'm not a Moses, I'm not an Abraham, I'm not Joshua, I'm not Deborah, I'm not Esther. All these people in scripture who had these big things that they accomplished, or people that they led, or battles that they conquered the enemy. That's not me at all. I'm just this little person over here. But yet I thought about this, and I had written something about it a while back, and several different examples in scripture. One of them that really came to mind a lot was the little girl that told her mistress about Elisha, the prophet, it was Naaman's wife. So anyway, I'll butcher that. But in 2 Kings 5, and it talks about how this little Israelite girl was carried away into captivity. Right there. A little girl carried away, captured and carried away and forced to serve the commander of the Syrian army. What a scary thing. But yet, when she found out, or somehow knew, that Naaman had leprosy, she said, would that my Lord were with the prophet who's in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy. And so she knew about Elisha and how he spoke for God and had the power of God. And she could have kept silent, or she could have thought to herself, I'm just a little girl. I'm a slave. Why should I say anything? But she did. She spoke up to her mistress, who then told Naaman. Naaman went to the king, and then the king wrote a letter to the king of Israel. And so it just made me think about these little voices that are in scripture, and that we might feel like we have little voices too. But as a result of her little voice, Naaman was healed. And then Naaman recognized God, who God was, that he was the true and powerful God. But what if she had felt like she was too insignificant? So she was one that I thought of. And then I thought about the Hebrew midwives. Don't know how to say their names. Shiphrah and Puah, however you say their names.
Yeah.
And Pharaoh called the men and basically told them, if it's a little boy born, kill the little boy. But they didn't. What if they hadn't? There's these two women who help babies be born. But the scripture says that the midwives feared God. So they made a big difference. And then one other example that I thought of is in 2 Kings 22. Hilkiah, the high priest, found the book of the law, this lost book of the law, in the house of the Lord. So he gave it to Shaphan the scribe, who then took it to King Josiah and read it to him, and read it in his presence. And it says that the king tore his clothes. It's like, here's all of this information that we've forgotten about. And what are we going to do? And then 2 Kings 22:13 says, go inquire of the Lord for me and for the people and for all Judah concerning the words of this book that has been found. For great is the wrath of the Lord that is kindled against us, because our fathers have not obeyed the words of this book to do according to all that is written concerning us. So, it led Josiah to lead the people to God and make a covenant with God, and brought the people back to God. And I see that this is our job. The Bible is almost to the world as a whole, a lost book. So we have to bring it to their attention. And that's what we do. We bring scripture to the world's attention and hopefully lead people to make a covenant with God. So I thought it was just a neat thing to think of our little voices when we tend to think that we're inconsequential, or we have no platform, or, maybe we think, I have so much history, so much past, so much sin in my past. Why would God use me? Or we compare ourselves and think, I'm not as good as so-and-so who can speak. So, I think of Lori last night. She's such a good speaker, and I wish I could speak like she does, but I can't. And so there's that comparison game that we do. But what can we do? I think we do the right thing. There's little things that we can all do, whether it's something like welcoming visitors warmly, or looking for opportunities, maybe being a silent partner in a Bible study, which will give you confidence to begin the word on your own. Just doing quiet things, not seeking praise, not trying to do things to be praised, but just to have a voice to bring this lost book to a lost world, which is what I hope we'll do.
Will you read the quote again?
It is, we don't have to do great things to make a difference. We can make a great difference by doing small things graciously.
I like the graciously part of that. And I think it's the perfect one to end on, because I think your last one kind of ties into my first one. Yeah. The Sally Clarkson quote about the everyday, and instead of waiting for the moment when sometime I can do something big to make a difference or make an impact for God, when I can invite somebody in, I can offer somebody something cold to drink, I can offer a listening ear and a hug and my attention, and all these little things that I can do graciously instead of harried or acting put out or whatever. And if I do that, it's just a sweet gift, and it does make a difference and does touch lives and does impact people without it being a big production.
Well, and define great,
Yeah.
What is great to me is not great necessarily to God. Maybe it is, but I think God doesn't think like we think. His thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. So when I think something great that someone does is something that makes a big splash, or a lot of people hear it, or
it's a lot
of people read it, or but yet God doesn't call all of us to do those things. He calls us to do what he's given us the ability to do. And so if we're always seeking to do something that is not what we can do, then we're not paying attention to God, I think. And I don't think we do that intentionally. I think we just want to, excuse the expression, have more bang for our buck, even though it may not involve any money at all. We just want to be effective. And I think of all of these little people in scripture, and I think of the women that listen to the podcast, maybe feel like, I can't do what so-and-so is doing, or nobody's listening to me. Why should they listen to me? But I think every single one of us can make a huge difference, a great difference, because when we hide behind scripture and hide behind the cross, that's what God asks us to do. So don't define great in worldly ways, but in spiritual ways.
Yeah. When I think of women who are great, that I think they're great, a word that keeps coming to mind is reliable. And that's not splashy or exciting or colorful or out there, but it is so powerful to me. And when there's a woman or a friend, a worker, a servant that is reliable, graciously reliable.
Yeah.
I mean, what a difference she makes, and what a joy it is to know her, or, if she's called to do something, she's going to do it, and she's going to do it with a good attitude. And, it's just that consistent reliability. And that's something that we can all do.
Salt of the earth people.
Yes.
Yeah. We need lots of salt of the earth people, good people that want to do things for God and not for themselves. So good one.
Very good.
Okay. So wrapping that up, and what we're going to Oh, sorry.
Hang on a second. I jotted down this little note because I knew all yours were going to be Jan Karen.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I do like that I remembered, I didn't go back and look at the books, but it's kind of a recurring theme in her books in the Mitford series is the characters always refer to the prayer that never fails.
Mm-hmm.
And that is to say, thy will be done.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love that. So I wanted to give a little no honorable mention to that one because anytime they find themselves in a difficult situation or something happens with a different character in the book or they're in a hardship or whatever, they'll say, you know what we need to do? It's
Mm-hmm.
time for the prayer that never fails. And
Yeah.
they'll say, Lord, thy will be done.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the prayer that never fails. And
That's right.
I love that. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that too. Yeah, there was one other that I didn't choose this one, but it's another one of hers. And she says, this is the quote, I prayed for someone like her, but never believed it could happen. It's Tim talking about Cynthia, and he found her later in life. But he said, we do that, don't we? Pray for something, but don't trust God for it. And you and I talked a little bit about this beforehand, and that's maybe a topic for another day. We're talking about prayer. But why is it that when we're surprised when God answers our prayer in the way that we ask him to answer it, and that's just, I've seen that happen over and over in my life. So just love her books.
I do too. Lots of good things.
Okay. So something good for you. That's how we're going to end our episode. Something good for you. And what is yours this week?
Okay. So mine is an idea.
Okay.
That I'm going to share. And the idea came from David Sproul. He just came and held our fall meeting for us and did a fantastic job. He and Tracy both were here. And in one of his lessons, he was talking about a former deacon of theirs that was a patrolman in Florida. And when he was in his patrol car and had downtime, instead of scrolling on his phone, he had written down, it's a little bit old school idea, but he had written down all the verses in Romans 12. And when you think about Romans 12 as a chapter as a whole, that's just the perfect blueprint for Christian living anyway. But he had written down each verse on a little card and punched a hole in the corner of those cards and attached it to a little key ring thing and was determined to memorize Romans 12.
Wow.
So he would take one verse at a time. And in those down times in the car, he would just go over that verse over and over and over again until he had that one. And then he would go on to verse 2, flip that card and go on to the next one. And I just loved that idea because I think about all those downtime waiting periods that we have, waiting to check out, waiting in the doctor's office, waiting for what the microwave timer to go off or whatever it is. More often than not, it is so easy to pull out this phone and just start trolling, mindless trolling. But how great would it be to keep something like that nearby? And for a minute, I thought, well, you could just put that on. You could just pull up Romans 12 on your phone. But you'd get those drop down notifications. You would.
Distraction.
And you'd be distracted by it. So if you just old school had verses written out, and in those downtimes, some of them, not all of them, maybe in the car, have it, like he did, just have it in your cup holder in the car and you're at the red light or whatever, just pull that out and spend more downtime memorizing the word of God. So that's my something good for you is that idea.
Love it. And it ties into my something good.
Good.
Except it's someone good. And how it ties in is that this person's husband has had his congregation doing something similar. Anyway, my someone good is Athena Scherfus this week. And
she's very sweet.
Oh, she is. If any of you out there know her, you already know this about her, that she's just the most loving, expressive, tender, sweet person, Athena. But she's my mom's caregiver now. And it just so happened that the timing was right and kind of right place, the right time. Athena's husband, Ronnie, preaches for the church where my brother and his wife and my mom attend at Buda Kyle near Austin. And she has had a caregiver come, I think 3 days a week. And talking about reliable, sometimes the people are not reliable. And the ones she had a couple that were fairly reliable, but it just got to the point where they weren't. So it just came up somehow that Athena wanted to do this, and she is it's just caregivers in general, good caregivers. It's a talent, and I'll text her and say thanks for loving on my mom, and she just writes back, it's a blessing for me. And I love that, to know that someone is with my mom that loves my mom. That I can't even, I mean, it makes a lump in my throat because I can't express how meaningful that is to me, that when I can't be there or when I'm not close, I mean, even when I'm there, I'm still 30 miles from her. But when we're here in Colorado and I think about her being by herself, or just whatever's going on in mom's life, she doesn't have the ability to go anywhere anymore unless someone takes her. She's just lost a lot of independence, and Athena will take her places, and Doug and Karen do too. I'm not saying that they don't, because they do, but in those times that they're busy with work or life, whatever's going on, Athena is there and will hug on her and love on her and cook for her, which is my mom's love language. And I'm just so thankful that Athena is there with my mom and taking care of her and loving on her, and she's just a good, sweet person. So caregivers out there in general, my hat is off to you. But Athena, I love you, and thank you for being my hands when I can't be there, and loving on my mom. It means the world to me.
Comforts your heart, doesn't it?
It does. All right. You have anything else you want to share?
No, just I was just thinking, if anybody does do the memory verse thing, wouldn't that be fun if we did it together, and we could share pictures of our little memory verse cards or whatever. I mean, you could type them up and print them off, but if you wrote them out, it might make it easier for you to memorize them. But it'd be fun if we shared those. It doesn't have to be Romans 12. It could be a different chapter.
Yeah, but I love Romans 12.
That'd be a good one. Yeah, that'd be a good one to start off with. Maybe we could issue a little challenge.
I don't think I even explained how that tied in, because mom carries around a little, they're not as big as 3x5, but they're little strips of, I want to say cardstock, probably, with the ring in them, because Ronnie, Athena's husband, is having them to learn. I don't know that it's memorizing, but it's learning some facts and things. So I thought that was interesting that you brought that up. So, all right. Good talk. Good discussion.
This was a great conversation. We hit a lot of things.
Yeah. There's just a lot of good things in books out there. And I think it's interesting to me that they all tie into scripture too, because everything that is wise comes from God, and we know that. And it's just interesting the different ways that God uses people to disseminate his information. So that's what I see in good literature.
Yeah. So, and if any of our listeners have some quotes or wise things that you picked up from literature, we'd love to hear them in the Looking Up group. Share them with us.
That'd be great. All right. Well, I've got a picnic to go to, and I know you've got lots of things going on too. So we will wrap this up, but I've loved chatting with you and getting to discuss things as always. It's always fun. It's the highlight of my week. So
mine too.
Yeah. I love you lots. And until next time,
keep looking up.
All right.